initially I plan to show this spreadsheet, but I don't think all of four of us we know that about that spreadsheet that. Oh, you know what? Why don't I still show that because it will be recording, so it will record that. Just a second. Let me share the screen and show for people. Okay, this is for people who will watch this video later on. I just want to remind you that you can sign up. This is a spreadsheet. So you can sign up for open symposium. You see there are dates, and you can just put your name there, title of your presentation, short paragraph, just description of that type of presentation. It could be presentation and discussion, or it could be workshops. You see there is some workshops. Then you can put either your Zoom address or mine, it's up to you, and then there will be a place for recording. You can see it's recorded in in day or two. There will be recording, a link to recording of this meeting. So welcome, everybody can sign up. We are meeting every 2 weeks. If there is somebody wants to propose a meeting, and contact me if you need any help. Okay, thanks a lot. On this, I'm passing to Melissa. Melissa, where are yours?
All right, great. Do you need me to introduce myself or anything?
It's up to you. Now you're completely in charge. If you want to introduce it.
All right. Well, I'll just say that my name is Melissa Bradford. I teach at DePaul University. I was also founder of a Sudbury school that's in the Chicago area. And yeah, I think that's good enough. So I have had an interest in dialogue for quite a while. I would say it began when I started the Democratic school that I started, the first one, because I had a lot of challenges in being able to conduct myself in a democratic manner. I moved from a conventional, by the way, I should say here that I'm really going to talk about sort of my journey to dialogic research methodologies. So that's why I'm kind of sharing my story here. So, in this school, you have to make all the rules together with the students and vote on everything. And, I had come from a conventional classroom where I taught 8th grade science. And so I just kind of naturally thought that students would agree with me because I was right about stuff. And surprisingly, they did not. And it was really a challenge. Emotionally, it was hard. I would get really upset about things because I was so passionate and also concerned for the well-being of the school that it kind of got in the way of me being able to really effectively communicate, with everyone at the school. And, at that point, I had been studying Daisaku Ikeda's work for quite a while. He's a Japanese thinker. He's a Buddhist, leader of a Buddhist organization in Japan. He has founded schools, and he writes a lot about dialogue, and he also has dialogues. He's published many dialogues. He's had thousands of dialogues, but published works, there in English, there's about 40 book-length dialogues that he has published, and another 40 that are in Japanese. So I kept reading what he said about dialogue and the idea of listening rather than being just your head filled with all the stuff you want to say, to try to put that aside and really try to understand the other person. And, listening was not my strength at the time. And, just really trying to see through someone else's eyes. So fast forward, I decided to get my doctorate, and I am in curriculum studies. I don't know what I want to do, but I did go there because Jason Gula my dissertation chair had a background in Daisaku Ikeda's work, and so I thought he'd be a good person to study with. And so I had many conversations with him about methodology, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And ultimately, and I presented, so I decided phenomenology. I was going to do a phenomenological study. So I went to a conference. I presented on a pilot study using phenomenology, and there was a scholar in the audience, a curriculum studies scholar, Ming-Fang He, and she's from China. As she was listening to me, you know, she raised her hand and she says, "No, why are you using a Western philosophical underpinning of your research methodology? Why aren't you using something that's non-Western, that's Eastern? You know, that's what you're studying." And it just blew me away. Like, what? There's a thing like Eastern methodology? What would that even look like? And so I started researching it, and I couldn't find anything. And so, you know, more conversations with my dissertation chair, and he said, you know, you're interested in Ikeda. He talks a lot about a dialogue. He has dialogues. He publishes dialogues. What about dialogue as a research methodology? And then I thought, wow, I don't even know what that would be like, but I'll look into it. And, you know, I started looking at Ikeda's dialogues, seeing if I could draw some inspiration from them. And then I discovered something called duoethnography, which is a fairly new research methodology, new like within the last, 10, 15 years, something like that. And Norris and Sawyer are the ones who published the most on duoethnography and its dialogic methods for research. And so I read all about that, and I thought, that's it, I'm going to do a duoethnography. But then my chair said, "Oh, I thought you were going to create your own methodology." And so, you know, I kind of played around with duoethnography, and I found out some inspiration for it. But duoethnography, the focus is, you know, like ethnography, cultural influences on you that you unpack through dialogue with another researcher. So 2, 3 of you sit down, kind of try to explore this, whatever particular phenomenon that you're looking at and how it's manifested in your childhood. They draw a lot on Bill Pinar's work, who writes about this process of Carrere, which is kind of inspired by psychoanalysis, I think, or connects to psychoanalysis, where you look at your past, you look at your future, your ideal future, you look at, you know, the current moment, and then you kind of work towards some sort of transformation. And so, so anyway, you know, I really enjoyed learning about that and thinking about how that might apply to my own research. In the meantime, the first class I had taken at DePaul was on Ikeda, one of his predecessors, Makaguchi, Bakhtin, and Vygotsky. And the theme of the class was creativity and critical thinking. And of course, we read again a lot about dialogue, especially with Bakhtin. And those ideas excited me, and they excited a colleague that was in the class with me. And he and I started meeting regularly to discuss all the ideas in the classes. We talked a lot about Bakhtin. How would you enact dialogic pedagogy, for example, in your classroom? He taught Japanese in a magnet school, K-8. And we, you know, I had this very different background in a democratic school. And so we just started meeting, and ultimately I ended up volunteering in his class. He teaches in Chicago Public Schools. And you know, we just started having dialogues. And then at one point, my chair said, maybe you should be recording those dialogues. So we started recording the dialogues. And, you know, it was just this very organic process. And so ultimately, what I did for my dissertation was, you know, I said that this was based on value creative dialogue, which is, again, this notion that Jason Gula writes about, based on Ikeda's dialogues, you know. And value creative means it's not that there's a telos, there's not a specific sort of purpose or end game to it. It's just that, you know, you engage in dialogue, and these kind of It can contribute to your own benefit. It can contribute to others, and it's aesthetically enjoyable. You like it. You feel good. So that's the value creative piece of it. And so, so what I ended up doing was I did a thematic analysis of Ikeda's dialogues. What does he say about dialogue? Came up with some themes. In particular, Ikeda talks a lot about discovering your shared your shared background, your shared values, and as opposed to value, but your shared values, and appreciating your differences through dialogue. And so, so I took the themes that I came up with from that analysis, and then I applied them deductively to my dialogues with my colleague Michio, and looked at like, how did we create value through our own conversations? So from there, what's happened since then? So that was my dissertation. Had a very interesting question asked to me by a member of my committee at my dissertation defense. She said, "Is this research?" And I was like, actually, the funny thing was Michio had come to my defense, and I just didn't even think. I was like, "What do you think, Michio? Let's talk about this." Everybody laughed. I was like, "Oh, I guess I shouldn't have done that. This is supposed to be me defending," but it was just such a natural thing to want to go right into dialogue with Michio. But of course, it's not generalizable. It's not systematic. So federal definition of research, no, it's not. But of course, for us it was. And, it impacted us both in different ways. I learned so much from our dialogues. I think Michio did too. We talked about a lot about his classroom practice and how he could make it more dialogic despite the constraints, of a conventional system. And like all the ideas that we talked about really helped me think more deeply and grow. Okay, so then since then, I started working with another colleague. She did narrative inquiry for her dissertation, and we started realizing there were a lot of commonalities, because of course, when you're in dialogue, you tell stories. And in narrative inquiry, it's a very relational type of methodology. And the relationship, they talk a lot about the relationship between the researcher and the participants. I still argue it's a little bit different, because there's still sort of a different status, between the researcher and the participants. But anyway, that was really, we've had really good conversations about research methodologies, and then thinking about like how they come together, value creative, dialogic, and narrative, types of approaches. And then finally, I've since discovered self-study, which is also quite interesting methodology. Self-study is done specifically by teacher educators, and teacher educators want to look at their own practice, and they ask, do my values that I hold as a teacher, like I'm telling my students, you should do this in the classroom, this, am I actually practicing that? Do my values match my pedagogy? And so that methodology involves use of critical friends. So colleagues talk to each other a lot in self-study to kind of push each other. And so dialogue is also, I think, kind of a key part in that research methodology. So that's just kind of, I really just want to make it mostly a conversation here. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview. If you have questions for me, we could maybe start there. Otherwise, I would love to hear just everyone's responses. Christy says it's fascinating, and she's jotting down notes.
So I have a question more about yours and Michio's dialogues. Do you have any kind of like a good memory of some particular dialogue that you could tell us about?
Sure. Yeah. So the earlier dialogues, I wish I had recordings of them because, you know, they were still so exploratory. We didn't know each other very well, and there were more moments of, I think, dissonance, or I wouldn't go so far as disagreement, but just, you know, like really kind of sharply differing perspectives. But we talked a lot about Peter Gray's work, and we talked about play, and Michio would share ways he's incorporating play in his classroom to teach language, to make it more like carnival, Bakhtin's idea of carnival. And you know, the students having different roles, and so then sometimes we just brainstorm ideas, you know, and I might say, oh, you should try to do this. You know, you're teaching sushi making, and students have to use Japanese as part of it. And, you know, maybe you could do something in the process, like, you know, I just get kind of those kind of brainstorming ideas. Another thing I'll kind of talk about a significant moment that I write about in the dissertation. Michio had a student that was kind of real challenging in the classroom, kind of pushing against, you know, everything that you know, Michio was doing, and we talked a lot about it. But I wanted to, you know, I really wanted to respect, this is his classroom. I'm not here to tell you what to do or anything, you know, but I'm happy to listen. But at one point, the student had come in during lunch, and they were at odds. I will say they were a little bit at odds, and you know, I just sort of jumped in and kind of talked to them both, asked them questions. Oh, so, you know, Michio, you know, sensei, you're saying this, and student, you're saying this, and do I understand this correctly? And it just sort of turned into a conversation between the three of us. And afterwards, Michio and I talked a lot about how that had gone, and how, because I had jumped in, that sort of ended up creating value for everyone in that moment. So that's something that happened. And then I remember also processing this idea of so Ikeda's idea of education, there's a term in Japanese, it's kyoiku, and kyoiku typically means like the teacher teaches and the student learns. But when Ikeda uses the same word kyoiku, he uses different characters. And in that one, it means student and teacher grow together. So we had a really interesting conversation about that, and what that meant, and how each person is changed in the process of dialogue. You know, my thinking changes, expands, his thinking changes, expands, same, you know, with a student through a dialogic engagement. So that's another example. I think those were kind of very, they felt really meaningful, you know, in the moment when we had those conversations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you said there are other different types of dialogic methodologies, or let's talk about like what other. So let me try to kind of like mirror what you said. That for you, dialogic approach to research is to, in this vein of duoethnography, that both two or maybe more people engage then in dialogues about whatever the ethnography they're talking about, and that they not necessarily always come to the agreement about that, but that they learn something from the dialogues themselves and not just from the ethnography. Is
Yes.
that what it is?
Yeah. I think that there's you know, a sort of an ethos that you bring into a dialogue. You have a sort of an orientation to really listen and hear the other person and be changed by the other person, be changed by your interaction with them. It's an openness to it. Maybe you change, maybe you don't, but I think that's a key part of a dialogic methodology.
I don't know whether we could talk about it as methodology. We had a similar idea in our book when we were talking about it. Is this method in the sense, not even in the sense, but is it method at all? Because it's not systematic, because it's unpredictable, because there is no unified kind of set of findings that you come, but more provocation for everyone else to then jump in with their own and be inspired to continue thinking about these things. And maybe we need a better concept of that as non-scientific or non-positivistic method, but social or personified research or something like that.
And I do think, like, I'm not really satisfied with the way that I analyzed my dialogues with Michio. It was, it was a deductive process, and it did feel a little forced, I'll say. But on the other hand, like, if you have a written dialogue, you have to do editing. It's not just the whole raw data. And so you have to figure out how you show those moments. One thing that I had talked with my chair about doing, but ended up not doing, is doing a rhetorical analysis. Like, what were the key turns in each, like, what happened in each moment? Like, did someone ask a question that sort of made something else unfold? I was really interested in, and still am interested in, rhetorical, invitational rhetoric. Invitational rhetoric is very different from the Aristotelian idea of rhetoric, where you're trying to persuade. And you're, the pathos, logos, whatever the other one is, ethos, is it? No. Anyway, where you're really trying to convey your idea to someone else and get them on your side. Invitational rhetoric is very different. It's kind of based on a feminist perspective that it includes openness, a sense of safety, and just like that very invitational way of bringing people into a conversation, which I don't think I'm even, I feel like I'm not very good at it, at doing that. But I think it's really important to be able to do that in dialogue. I won't say, now let me correct what I said. I feel like I'm not good at doing that in a classroom. When it's one-on-one with someone, like when I sat down with Michio, it came so naturally to just ask a lot of questions, be really curious, and know the questions to ask, which I think is when you're sitting down one-on-one with someone, you can do that. When you're with a group, it's a little harder because you have all the different, individuals and what each one is bringing into the room.
Yes, I kind of feel some interesting tension in what you're talking about just right now. It's actually both proud, but right now, for me, when you're trying to so-called capture the dialogue, and I think that's the wrong, in my view, the wrong move. And why it's the wrong move? Because, you constantly struggle between what I hear, and we're all struggling with that, but it's very clear what you just said. It's constantly transforming dialogue into IT. It's something in the thing, in creating thing out of dialogue. And that's the problem. When you say, I want to portray, I need to edit it. I need to do. So in order to become it, positivist science, if you think about that, positivistic science, it's trying to focus on structural, functional patterns. It's constantly looking for the patterns. You start doing patterns, right, in rhetorical patterns, for example. It's a patterns, finding patterns. By the way, method is coming. Why is it focused so much on method? Because it's technology. It's epistemology, but mostly technology. It's basically what positivistic science, why there is so much focus on method? Because basically it says, find the right method that leads predictably to the truth if you skillfully use it. And you need to show that the method is correct and you're skillful enough to use it. There's two things that you need to show that constantly. But it's about kind of creating everything in the things. And well, this is where Bakhtin criticized with some kind of conscience, how to say that, not conscious, but he tried to be very careful not to overdo it, his criticism. And it took me a while to figure out, like, because initially I was much more on his criticism, and I didn't notice how careful he's trying to do that. Because there's nothing wrong to transform things into things if it's helpful and if it's limited. And it's very useful, actually, to do that. So positivism is something that is helpful and useful. The problem is that positivism is never possibly can be done even. And there is other parts that positivism tries to make invisible. It's doing it. It's doing dialogue, but it makes it invisible. So in my view, what I think about dialogic research, not methodology, because again, methodology is colonization, in my view, positivistic colonization.
Yeah.
It's like in art, like, some people think in art that there is such idea that there is a method, but it's nonsense. There is no such thing as method, but there is something about from that. It's like way of doing things. And you can actually discuss how to way of doing things. It's very interesting. And it has technical aspects. There is nothing wrong about technical aspects. It's like this promise that the techne will, using the Greek term techne, will lead to the kind of paradise. You can solve all problems through the techne. Some, yes. No, all no. And that's kind of technique is great things. There is nothing wrong with technique. It's beautiful, it's useful, and so on and so forth, but limited. And there's another part that I think what we are trying to do, all of us, is trying to rehabilitate, because it's happened. All people who are doing completely positivistic research, they're doing dialogic as well, but they just hide that. How they hide that? They usually hide that when they so-called discuss the findings, or even why it is even finding. Why is it important? Because there's patterns and patterns and patterns and patterns. So what? And answering to this question, so what? It's the logic question. There is a lot of things. Who cares? Why is it important? Why you attracted attention to that? Why you start doing about that? Like why you get on the journey about that? And all of this is dialogic questions. Somebody asked them, and researchers, positivistic researchers replied that, but they did that in order to not to, because this become dangerous questions in a way. Why? Because another person will see it differently.
Yeah.
And positivism will not, you transcend positivism there. You're leaving that away, and the people are afraid of that. So I think what we need to do, in my view, is to create this culture of addressing this question and not to be afraid. And when people, for example, ask you, is it science? Yes, it is. But it is not positivistic science. There is a lot of questions that part of the science is interested in that not positivistic. Like, for example, how can you generalize? Dialogue cannot be generalized.
Right.
On another hand, dialogue can involve generalizable things when it's it. And this is keeping you, in dialogue, it's I, like, it's Buber kind of things. It's
Buber.
Buber, Martin Buber. I, you, and it. So there is nothing to be, there is nothing wrong to keep it there, but dialogue primarily focused on I and you. This part of things, but it is also kind of, if you, it's very difficult to imagine dialogue without anything, without it.
Well, to me, to me, the it is, the question is, what is the dialogue about? What about? And it cannot be a dialogue without being about something. it may be explicit or maybe implicit or maybe many abouts there, but it has some kind of about.
And but you know, when you start thinking about it, you need to figure out, like when we write text, so we of course in dialogue immediately with many things. We in dialogue with people in social studies, we are in dialogue with people whom we study. That's one thing. We dialogue with ourselves, and of course we dialogue with the bigger community, and communities probably plural. Like it's a pedagogical community, like educational community, research communities, maybe bigger society, we're in dialogue with them, and that dialogue has to be revealed. Instead of cover it up, like in positivistic research, it's in full-blown scale. While if we have positivistic aspects of our research, there is nothing apologetic about that, and we have to do it carefully, and we have to do it in there is nothing wrong to show that we have patterns, for example, about something. But the focus becomes in dialogic kind of part of that. What's the meaning of that patterns? Why is that pattern important, and for whom it's important? Is it what other people will say about what I'm saying about my meaning, authorial meaning of that patterns? Like, why is it important for me? Why is it me? Like, why is it touching me about? So this has become very, very interesting in this case. And in this case, we don't need to kind of try to kill it, a dialogue, and make it eat for other people. In this case, we kind of have a lot of kind of high of the being engaged, like you describing that. But then when it's become on the paper, it's kind of become it. Well, it doesn't need to become it, because you want to now engage your readers in that, or yourself. All things that now you and your interlocutor in the past, right? So now you can ask questions that you have new questions for them, and new observations, new things, and what you asking, like what they think about. And even outcome of that research become very interesting, because positivistic research is, again, finding the most important, and it's finding that without any subjectivity as much as possible. Everybody should see the same thing. Otherwise, it's not finding.
It's a science in the sense that it's universal. It has to become a universal truth or value or something.
Or at least to some community. It's kind of particular, maybe not universal, but particular, but at least within that community, it is universal. It's limited universal. But in kind of dialogic focus, like what's the kind of purpose of research as a dialogic part of that? Because again, positivistic is still there. You can talk about things that you notice as a pattern. There is nothing wrong about that. But you're focusing on the meaning of that. So in my view, it's about transformation of the people's subjectivities that they go. You exactly engage, it's a provocation. It's dialogic research becomes dialogic provocation. Like for me, for example, if you want to visualize how it's working for something, I don't know if you read that book, because for me it was the first dialogic research, very empirical, that I ever seen and experienced myself. I would not even say seen, because I'm experiencing, and I continue experiencing that, because I'm bringing my students on that, and it continues and continues and continues. It's about preschool and three cultures. And by the way, for the I know rather well people who Joe Tobin. I don't know his colleagues, Joe Tobin, who did this research. He went, Melissa, in case or somebody doesn't know, he went together. He did it twice already. I hope he will do it third time. He did this research twice. First, he did in the 80s. He went to Japan, to China, into Hawaii, in the United States, and he videotaped preschool, and just in naturalistic study. His plan was initially exactly to do positivistic research. By the way, I'm saying that not because I think that, he wrote about
he
that.
Said that.
He said that, yes. And Joe Tobin reflected, and he first realized that he actually did a dialogic research. He realized that himself later. Because initially what they did, one good thing that he had team, or international team. his graduate students were who participated in first research, because he repeated in 2000s that research, exactly the same thing he did. But in the first term, he had an international team, and it just happened by convenience from technical reasons. He didn't think about that. It would be dialogic to have one graduate student was from China, another one from Japan. It just happened. You know, for again, because of linguistic things, because, you know, Joe Tobin couldn't speak the Japanese or Chinese. Okay, so for that reason. But what's happened is they did not start noticing exactly functional structural patterns. The problem is they disagree what it means. And another thing is that, so initially, you know how to do positivistic research. You disagree. What you need to do next? You need to verify. Right? Who is right? I'm right, or Millie, or Abram right, or Christy right, or Anna's right. Of course, you're going to the participants and interview them what they think about that.
Yeah.
And suddenly he said, wait a minute. There's strange thing that first of all, they keep saying different things, and then they start showing these episodes to educators from different cultures. And they start saying different things. And he said, they say, wait a minute, our research become completely, it's not about patterns to find. It's about exactly this mimic making that happens in the cultural mimic making. And it's continuous. Let me give one example how his research continues and transcend what it's about, what they wrote. I show his videos to my students, and for many years already, soon it will be 30 years that I'm showing them. And with time, my students start noticing things that neither Tobin and his researchers noticed that. Let me give one example. That example in the United States, it's about United States practice. There was in the preschool, in Hawaiian preschool, one of the practice that they did, the teacher did with the kids, 4-year-old kids, was doing soup, real soup, with the real ingredients. And one thing of that, they used the real knives, kids, 4-year-old kids. Starting early 2000s, my students become all commenting about that. Before, nobody commented about this.
Yeah, cutting to cut the vegetables and in preparation. Yeah, and suddenly this became a big issue. Knives, like,
yeah, this is child abuse. You know, that's child abuse. And you see the culture change in the United States. So, and this research in a way, dialogic continues. So it creates a big question: is it a child abuse or not child abuse? And before it was not an issue. And many other things. What's the meaning of this?
There is another very interesting scene about the conflicts and conflict resolution. And in the United States, it's like this, constantly adults telling children to put their thoughts in words and to discuss things and not act out on that. And this scene is criticized by the others also. But during the time, even we started noticing new things in that scene that for 10, 20 years, nobody noticed about not only what they say, but the relationships between the children and the teacher completely, we didn't notice how much politics the children are making, even when they are silent.
This is a little bit not, this is example not good because positivistic research will bring the same examples. It's not about noticing more details about something. It's changing your eyes. This is what, like for example, my students, why is it important for? I see there many things that invisible for them because their cultural values were operating through them now become visible because they reflect through other culture, because they're in dialogue now with other cultural values. With the whole discussion, is it a good values, cultural values, or bad? Good for what? Good for bad for what? For whom? All of this, it's the dialogue continues. And what's interesting is they right now see, we might discuss Japanese classroom, right? that preschool. But now they see American, and now they, like before, they would not even think twice to make a judgment about something. This is good or bad. But after that, they become hesitating because now the voice, the internal dialogue continues. Are you sure that it's good, or are you sure it's bad? And why? And you can see pluses, you can see minuses of that, and you're in dialogue with this. So in this case, Joe Tobin, in my view, was pioneering, and he came from them not by reading Bakhtin. He read Bakhtin after that. But it's just, it's interesting how it's happened.
Yeah.
He wanted to do very good quality positivistic research, but in this, he was almost like pushed in completely different direction. So we talked with him. I remember, like, what's the outcome of research? It's engaging people in dialogue. It's a provocation. The research purpose of research to prepare a new provocation in which readers will engage in that.
Yes, instead of having findings, it's engaging in the future dialogues and from many different angles, and it transcends his book. He doesn't even know what Eugene's students are discussing, or when we present this in conferences about what our students said about that, which now is even further dialogue from going on a tangential, and what other issues are even noticed or mentioned that originally they didn't even see, or it was meaningless for them, or there is new angles of looking. Yeah, that's the very interesting one.
And it's interesting that his research actually changed some Japanese practices in the national because some of these findings were shown on national TV, and they engage in debates. And 20 years after, you already see incorporation of the new practices in Japanese preschool because of these national debates that spurred by this. Let me give specific examples of what I'm talking about, so you will realize that. They notice, and it's interesting that they notice that 4-year-old kids were playing with the younger kids, 2-year-old kids. And initially it was girls who were doing that.
And spontaneous. It was just like
spontaneous. It happened. And they asked, there was interviewing educators, Japanese educators. Why is that? And it's sparked this idea that the families, Japanese families, become more and more one child, and there is not much interaction among the ages, and it's not happening. And they're happy to see that, but and I don't know how it's transforming that. At some point, they said, like, wait a minute, why is it we saying we're happy to see it? Maybe we should kind of promote that. And you can see 20 years after that, it's already promotion of that. And it's not only girls who are doing that, it's the boys as well, because they have time in which all the kids go and play, and not only play, like there is a wonderful scene when a boy, 4-year-old boy, teaching a 2-year-old boy how to pee correctly in the toilet. And not to be afraid of flashing, for example, because actually it's for younger kids, it can be scary part, but also how to pee how to pee correctly. And I think it's very interesting, which of course generated for my students huge things. How come the videotape was going on in toilet? It's a crime. But you see it, which is absolutely not addressed, of course, in the Joe Tobin, because he didn't think about that. Well, they did it in the early 2000s. And now, 2020, it's become an issue. This is what dialogue research is. It's constantly provokes dialogue about the values, about what's important, what you hear.
I guess that leads me to asking how we then share, if I don't even know what to call it, if we don't say findings, how do we when I think about duoethnography, for example, they tell a lot of stories and they use different creative ways of representing. Sometimes it's a transcript, sometimes they have photos, sometimes they show poetry, they have like photos of a journal entry, and I do think it's kind of more to me more engaging than just here are the findings. I'll say I'm working with a doctoral student right now, and we're thinking through using art dialogically as research, and so we're sharing art with each other that inspires us, but then we're also producing art, which is very hard, like you have to be vulnerable and share something, especially we're amateurs in some ways. And so I'm writing poetry and like sharing it with her, and I'm painting watercolor and showing her, and then we're talking about it, and just, it is a provocation, and it's very inspiring. But like, again, how to share it with others or represent it, so that especially so that it doesn't lose its dialogic quality. Because I think that's something that I find difficult when I write, or if I read some kind of dialogue text, it loses the spark.
Well, because again, you constantly here you're talking about how to share or how to represent, and it's it, and
right.
That's the problem. Which means using Bakhtin's term, finalizing. It's constantly finalizing. It can be kind of engaging finalizing, but still it's finalizing. It's aesthetics. What in my view need to be, it's reverse. You need to unfinalize. You need how to address. Like, you know what? If you read, which I recommend you to read, Joe Tobin, you kind of, it's almost like, I don't know if you want, if you watch the Japanese movie Rashomon, there is many stories, and you say, so what's really happened? And there is no finalizing. You don't know what's really happened, but you see these different things, and you discuss. So you constantly hear different voices that Japanese educators say, Chinese Americans say that. Joe Tobin interview, by the way, within them, they say different things. It's not only one thing. So and which immediately kind of put you in position, what do you think about that? He didn't say that question, but it's in the air. But you would, because it's about many, what it's called, cases, probably better to say, right? They're very ethnically charged. There is relational, it's moral, almost like moral story. There's moral conflicts going on. Sometimes it's not, but still, even using knives is child abuse.
Right.
It's not just any kind of innocent things, but it's child abuse. Like teachers didn't stop one boy hitting another boy. What? She's unprofessional. Like what she's doing is she's doing wrong things, And you hear Chinese voices of Chinese educators, or American who was saying, if you continue doing this, you kind of raising criminals. And then you hear Japanese educator reply that it's about when actually when the young 4-year-old girl reporting on this, she said, why are you telling it to me? Do something yourself.
The teacher,
So his teacher said, why are you telling it to me? Do something about that. And they do. And that's what's interesting. The kids doing something about that. And it's like, so you're not thinking.
And in fact, it turns out that for the Japanese teacher and the principal, this was actually on purpose, letting children. They think that when little children fight, it's a learning empathy. For them, that's a positive thing, nothing negative.
But it invites you to conversation. I remember, I had this interesting situation when I was asked, there was athletic camp at the University of Delaware in summer for African-American kids. And they asked me to come to them and just to talk about what university is about. And I just imagined that, 13, 14 years old kids listening to me about what university is about. I thought it's kind of will be boring. And it will happen just before they need to go to lunch. They want to go to lunch and whatever. So I decided to show them a fragment from that video about this. Oh, what a wonderful discussion we have with these kids. And by the way, they didn't want to go for lunch because of that, because they were so full of emotions. They say, this is the teacher, this is terrible teacher. I'm talking about Japanese teacher. Like, how come she? And I start thinking, but what about? And they start thinking, some of them say, maybe maybe I want to be in the Japanese class. Maybe I would like to experience things like that. Maybe there is something, and they start debating with each other this kind of issues. And they ask me, so this is what university is about, where you're discussing things like that. Unfortunately, I decided not to lie because it's not exactly true that most of the university classes were people even discussing things like that. But some I hope don't do.
Yes, even your experience like in urban systems, which I just retired, Newark Public Schools, Newark, New Jersey. I was teaching the summer school, and a lot of the terminology you're using is like democracy, democratic schools, which these are certainly are not. We're trying to go, in other words, there's some research on insurgent teachers trying to actually change things. So I decided, why don't we try to do things like, why don't you decide how to walk in the halls? Why don't get the students to decide what you want to do? What would you like to? How would you like to organize the class and such? So, person who was like the assistant teacher says, "No, they can't. They got to walk in a straight line or whatever." But it would, and I realized this would take like a while, but it could be done to change the class. But it's so much. What do we say? Reversing the oppressive conditions. But I think that this talk is wonderful, by the way, and very inspiring.
So in this case, Melissa, you don't need to make it and to present it. It's unpresented.
Yeah. So also we also struggle with different ways to present it, because kind of like we have to publish in some way. That always is some finalization. And how can you do so? In one series of articles in a special issue here at the Dialogic Pedagogy Journal, Eugene's articles about the freedom of students to decide about themselves, his comments of the various commentators were preserved as comments. So you see them on a PDF appear in the bubbles there, like yellow and something like that. Or sometimes we put the comments in the text, in the double brackets, so that with a different date to just kind of like, there is a comment, we are claiming something, but somebody else has something to say about it, and it's there, It could be disagreement or addition of something, or just, whatever thought inspired by that. So that's possible. Another thing that I try to do.
Anna, can you interrupt? For example, Melissa, just on this exactly things. Like, remember you said in dissertation, somebody asked you, but is it science? That is great, provocative, challenging questions. Like, it will be so nice to include that.
So interesting that you say this, because I wrote a chapter for a book. It's for curriculum studies, doctoral students, about methodology. And I call it the insert name here methodology. And it's all organized by questions. Every section is about the question that prompted me to my next stage. And I would like to think that is provocative in the sense of like the reader can ask the questions to themselves as well. And by it being insert name here methodology, that means the reader has to, discover their own methodology, rather than me prescriptively, giving them a methodology. So
Okay.
how important is it that, you know, in the example with the Japanese and the Chinese that you describe, how important is it that they have such different backgrounds to be able to provoke a dialogue, right? They're from different cultures. They have an outsider perspective on each other's cultures. Can that still be recreated? Even if, yeah, go ahead.
No, in this case, it's interesting to show and engage exactly the differences and this diversity of views and cultures and sensitivities.
It's very stark when there are people from different cultures. We were just talking the other day about that. It's kind of naturally comes because the different cultures bring naturally these differences, and you stumble upon them. But even people from the same culture obviously don't have the same opinion. Even if you're in the cult, you don't always have the same opinion. But maybe then you have to dig deeper and to be more brave to say something that sounds like dissident. When you're from different cultures, you kind of have a whole culture behind you. It says, well, we do it this way, or we think that way. So it's kind of like you have a support of that cultural view. When it's a personal disagreement or you don't have, then it's always the question also, not just with agreement, disagreement or point of view, but the relationship between the people who are in dialogue, like what kind of difference this difference makes for their relationship. Is it something tearing them apart? Is it a power struggle? Is it something else? So that also, we never explored that so far, but that's part of the dialogue also.
So very interesting you say that, because so I was asked to teach a class called Stakeholder Relationships. And the students in the class, most of them are becoming higher education leaders or principals in K-12 schools. And the first time I taught it, it was just, it did not go well. But then I had the idea of organizing it around dialogue, and dialogue at 3 levels: dialogue with yourself, dialogue with another, and a dialogic organization. And so I give them exercises. One of the ones that I have them do is find someone in the room that you have a disagreement with about something. It could be your favorite ice cream flavor. It could be a movie. It could be something serious, you know, and I have them make a list. I give them some prompts and they write down different things. And then they try to find somebody that they, you know, I hate that kind of music. I can't believe you like that kind of music. And I have them explore it in the way of, you know, the idea of, you know, what, even though you disagree on this, is there anything that you share as you talk about this disagreement? And then is there something you can appreciate about that other person's different perspective? And that's a really great exercise. And it all leads to an assignment where they have to have you know, a longer dialogue, like maybe 45 minutes or an hour, with someone in their lives that they feel, you know, they have a trusting relationship with, but they have some kind of a difference of opinion or perspective on. And I encourage them to have a difficult, but not too difficult, not too, you know, don't go too far and risk things, you know, too big, but, you know, explore your differences and then try these different dialogue strategies. Like Jim Knight writes about advocacy and inquiry, you know, how to really be curious about the other person, but also how to advocate for yourself while still, you know, keeping an open space between you and not turning it into to debate. And my students just love that assignment. Some of them have had really, really powerful experiences. And many of them say, like, I never knew about dialogue. I never knew that I could have dialogue. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on that.
Well, my thought about that, I'm kind of ambivalent, let me tell you, for several things. One thing, it's idealized dialogue. Dialogue is not something good, nicey, goody. Right. Another thing, it is, I don't know if dialogue can be assigned. it can be provoked, but I don't think it can be assigned. If it's people start feeling that it's assigned, it's creating this oppressiveness. And by the way, you see how Dialogic, I came to democratic education from dialogue exactly because I started realizing that real dialogue resists this conventional school, which is driven by assignments. Everything is assigned.
Yeah.
And this is, and you coming dialogue sounds like more from democratic engagement, which is what, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm coming from opposite kind of things. It's from dialogue. It was initially when I learned about Summerhill, I thought what's that? My pathway was from dialogue. I realized that it's impossible. Dialogue has political realm and political ramifications, and which is democracy. And democracy. So I came from dialogue, not from democracy. Came to the dialogue from the. So that's another thing. Let me finish on, and then another thing is that really I don't believe that dialogue has rules, or you need to listen, or you cannot debate things, or you need to It's a lot of things, and sometimes listening is good, sometimes not. Sometimes you see everything is in the flux, and everything is kind of in the moment. It's the art, and also your responsibility to deal with that. So it is kind of so if it is provocation, it's great, but if it's become like assignment rules, you need to be careful not to debate things when you want to debate things. In my view, that's straitjacketing there. Okay, Anna, sorry.
I also came from dialogue and also from play. And this whole thing that when you use play for education, it becomes fake. It's everybody knows it's not really play. You just have to. So it's kind of like a real disappointment for most of the players in school that's play. Although it could be enjoyable for sometimes for some people in some situations. That's true too, because the teacher or whoever invented the play could be very engaging. But still, it's not something that is, for me, play and dialogue both have to be mutually voluntary, like both parties or both the parties have to be voluntarily into that and want to engage. And then another thing for me is very influential on me, this idea that different people engage in different ways, in different times, and for different reasons at different times. And so that if you see somebody not being engaged, sitting on the side, that should be totally legitimate. And you don't really know whether they're engaged or not, because it also comes from the studies of play that little children first observe others for a while, and or the others first reject the new ones. So there is this period of kind of like thinking like, what is that? And you have to have a freedom not to engage also in dialogue and not be thought of by anybody or feel that there will be something wrong if you don't engage in that.
So I think those are really great points. I will say that I do present it as an experiment, try it out. And I don't I don't say there are rules. I say there are different dispositions that you can practice with this assignment. Try it out. I would say that, these are graduate students and they all are really eager, at least almost all of them. I really haven't had anybody say they don't want to do it. And I really haven't anybody say they regretted it or it was a bad, assignment or they wouldn't do it. I mean, the students seem awfully eager to do it. And they're often quite surprised at how much they learn about sort of having a dialogic disposition in a conversation. I'm also thinking about, like, in duoethnography, they talk about tenets rather than sort of rules or a fixed methodology, but here are some tenets that kind of get at the spirit of dialogic engagement. So, but at the same time, there are those tensions there certainly that I can I can recognize, and you know, true dialogue, yes, it does need to be mutually voluntary. I guess what's interesting is often the students, it's almost like an excuse. I have an excuse to engage dialogically with someone I've really been wanting to engage dialogically with because it's a class assignment. So now I have permission to go to this person. Like sometimes they want to talk to someone who has a different religion, right? But it's not something that comes up in polite conversations and they feel awkward or uncomfortable, but because it's a class assignment, they get to do it. And they're so happy that they had that opportunity. And I think a lot of students walk away with the idea that, you know, I want to have a planned dialogue with someone, meaning a planned dialogue just means, you know, we're committing to really trying to understand the other person. It doesn't mean it doesn't, you know, we talk about, you know, Berbelis writes about how dialogue is not just like, okay, I'm only having a dialogue right now. No, you're meander, dialogue, conversation, debate, discussion. Of course, you're doing all of that, but you're still coming into it with this disposition of, I really want to understand you and how you're looking at something. And I want you to really understand me and how I'm looking at it as well. So it's sort of a, you know, it's an agreement. Like when you enter into it, it's sort of an agreement or a commitment, you know, kind of like, maybe it's kind of like, you know, a democratic school, right? You walk in with this understanding that this is how we work things out here. You don't have to do it and you can do other things, but you know, the formal structure of the school, if you do have issues or problems or something you want to propose or change, we have this way of engaging. Which is a democratic and dialogic way.
Yeah. Oh, but one thing that is interesting about democratic school that everybody can change that. And usually in conventional school, it's coming from the teacher, and it's very difficult to change.
Yeah.
And in my view, that's a good criteria to see how lovely it is or not, whether or not the students can change things. And it's okay. Still, you know, it's okay, which means who is saying that it's okay? Usually the teacher. So the domination is still there. What Jim talks about, benevolent dictator, is still in the room.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, like for me, was one of the beautiful cases when my kind of benevolent dictatorship collapsed at least a little bit in my class, one of my classes. You know, we selecting topics for next class discussion, and students are just, and so we have what I call curriculum map, which is what's possible to study, and getting more and more on that. In one of the classes, there are more than 80 topics right now. So, and students can add new topics, of course. And in one of the classes, they added a topic, which is like topic. Was Eugene choose? Eugene can choose. Okay, not can choose. Eugene chooses the topic first, and at some time they voted out. They voted in this topic, so they gave topic to me, and then I told them the next topic for the class will be this, and asked me why. Because usually, you know, how the class, you need to convince others for your topic to vote on that. So you always like, why is it a good idea to study this in general and next class in specific? How it's related to the previous ones, for example, or maybe not related, but you know, something happens in the country or happened, we must study that right now. Drop everything and study that. Okay. Sometimes it can, but you need to you know, explain, justify. You cannot just say
justify.
Even sometimes it's funny justification because I'm interested in that. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Or even as funny as that, if you vote for my topic, I'll bring food for that, and people who voted for that, I will give money food to you. That even that kind of dirty politics. So they told me why, and I told them. In this case, I decided to test that. I said, just because you choose me to select topic, I'm choosing that. I don't need to explain why. Silence and say, no, in our class you have to. And if you're not explaining to us, we will reward, and we will choose something else. And I thought, that's it. They really destroy my authority. I cannot do anything about that, so I have to explain to them. I didn't decide not to test them, not to explain, and then they will reward and choose something else. But I really like that moment, that I cannot anymore remain this dictator and choose something without although it's on that consent, but I cannot do it. I have to explain why.
You're answerable.
Yes, exactly. That's a very good point. I need to write it down. Yes, exactly. Answerable. Yes.
So I have a question for you. I'm thinking I should show my students in my class this fall this conversation. The class is called Dialogue and Education. So how do we can we right now in this moment provoke them? You know, have engage in dialogue with them. This my future class.
Well, what about?
Well, you know, the dialogue in class, like, should be dialogue in class, or can dialogue be forced on people? What about people who don't want to dialogue? What about people who wants to want monologue? And what about that? Are they bad students or not? Or is it your responsibility, me as a teacher, their teachers? I'm actually addressing directly them. It's your responsibility to do what the students want or what you want. Like, you believe in dialogue, for example, but what if some students don't believe in dialogue and believe in monologue or something else?
Yeah, I had such an example that in one class that I taught at Chestnut Hill College, the psychology student that were new to me and I to them, demanded that I prepare PowerPoints and not start with the dialogue or not use dialogue at all. They want lecture and me to tell them what is the truth there.
And is it not dialogic to do what they want you to do in this case? Like, I want that. And what does it mean to be even teacher in this case? Who is the teacher? Is it one who institution assigns, or ones that students ask for help? And so this, in my view, this is very interesting questions to discuss in this case. And I don't know whether or not students want to discuss.
Well, sometimes, yes.
We had on one of my classes I want to share, there was a very interesting happened. It was a class on cultural diversity. And at that time, I didn't teach, my students didn't choose topics. I chose the topics. So almost at the end of the class, the topic was about theories of multiculturalism. And there is a very interesting book about that. It's called Culture and Teaching. Very good, interesting book. And they presented this several theories about that. And so with my students, we actually read in the class about them. And of course, the question becomes, for me, what kind of theory they will choose of multiculturalism, and as a students and as a teachers, which is well interesting because some people voted differently. And some, I forgot what's the name of the series. This is like my brain doesn't work that as well. One of this was radical, I remember. Another was progressive.
And one is, you see, seeing it was Martin Luther's thing, like everybody, we should not see the colors, just everybody.
No, Anna, it's a completely different story. That's not about race whatsoever. No, it was about like radical, progressive, and I think one was called conservative, which is, I think that's the three options that they had. And conservative, basically, if I kind of sum them up. Conservative is about teaching about consensus in the society. 2 + 2 = 4, everybody agree. Justification is, by the way, very easy, clear. Like, it's a public education. We talk about public education. And all, taxpayers pay money, and they want to pay money for something that everybody agrees. Like, everybody agreed that 2 + 2 = 4. About evolution, not everybody agreed. That's why it should not be taught. Like more or less, people agree that Shakespeare is great writer. That's what we need to study Shakespeare. Something like that. Something that we all agree that George Washington was great president, and we need to study George Washington about and the way how he's great. Any controversial topic should be cut out. Like Columbus, if it's Columbus controversial topic, we should not touch Columbus. And that's, by the way, why we should not in history discuss anything that is current at first, because we don't have consensus now about that. We should not discuss it. So why is it multicultural? Because it's a melting pot. The idea is behind that we're melting one nation, and we're melting all the differences and to create one nation out of this. So this is conservative. Progressive is about following interests, like whatever interest is your, and by the way, I'm caricaturing a little bit about all of them. You should understand that. So it's about following, it's a John Dewey, it's about following somebody's interests, whatever is interesting, you should study that. And of course, since controversy is interesting thing usually, you should study controversies as well. And radical is more about like focusing on the pains of the society, like whatever society experiences in painful or experiencing problems, we need to focus on that. And again, there is justification of that. So there was a very interesting debate within my students, group of the students who were conservative as a teachers. The biggest thing happens, what as a teacher, whom you want to be as a teacher. And the ones who were progressive and radical on another side. So, and I remember some point, one student who was either progressive or radical, I don't remember, he was, I think it was male students, saying to other group of the students who are conservative, the like conservative approach, they say, you're hypocrites. And they said like, oh, why? That's why. I said, you know what? Look, you're conservative. You don't want any discussions. You want only truth that everybody agree, and there's nothing to discuss. But meanwhile, you yourself admitted you enjoy the discussion that we're having now in our class. And that was the interesting moment when the other side like, that's true. So why you enjoy it yourself and you don't want to bring it to your students? You're robbing them. And that was
but there is also very often the thought of the graduate students enjoy this kind of dialogic class, but when you tell them that would they do that if they are teaching undergraduates? Oh no, they're not. They possibly cannot because they're immature or they do whatever. And that goes further and further. If you talk to undergraduate students, they don't think it should be done in the high school level or something like that. Right. But in the meantime, they feel themselves very
they deserve it
and deserve it and very.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the big difference as you go to the higher level, as you go to college and then graduate, it's more and more your choice to be there. You know, graduate students mostly, I feel like they're all there because they really want to be there. I don't really teach undergrads, so I can't really characterize them. Some of them feel like they don't have a choice, like you say, Eugene. They're prisoners of education.
It's more like from sadism. I call that argument. It's moving from sadism to masochism. Like for younger kids, because they don't have choice, it's a sadism. Because I like to do that. I like to teach that way. That's why they have to suffer that way. And later they choose to do that, right? So they choose suffering. So they have to. They kind of prefer to be kind of experiencing pain.
They learn to love the pain.
Love the pain. Yes.
Well, I'm eager to ask my students about that.
Yes, and it will be interesting what they think about this. And so there is.
It's also interesting when the students are voting whether they would what they like as teachers and what they like as students, and you see the immediate difference. how they would be very conservative teachers, but as students, they would hate a conservative teacher.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's something. The first time I taught the stakeholder relationships class, that was the big struggle, is that the students were really angry that I wasn't giving them prescriptive rubrics and everything, very, very much determined in advance. Not all the students felt that way, but there were a few that were really dominant, and they really wanted and expected that kind of class. They did not want, I think, because their rationale, my life is busy, I don't have time for all of this, just tell me what I need to do and I want to just do it, and tell me exactly how to get an A, and I'll just do those things and nothing else. Yeah.
And that's a good, again, question, whether or not the students like this, whether or not they should get what they want or not. And that's a very interesting question.
And maybe they would not be like that in some other class, because, then 10 of them come to your class, or 20, but for different reasons, even if it's assigned, they have different approach to that subject matter.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, let me a little bit problematize that. It's, when people ask, like, how this remote control works, most of the people understood that question or implied this question. It's just like, what they mean by that is when I need to press, on what I need to press to switch on the TV on or off, right? Or how to change the volume or switch channels or something like that. But minority people will understand that how TV communicates with remote control. How does it work? But in my view, it's not like one question is better than another. It's embedded in what's the purpose, what the interest is there of the people. And by the way, it's dynamically can change. It might change from one to another. And there is nothing wrong about that as well. But this idea, sometimes we educators think that one question, like, oh, this is deep conceptual question. Like it's like you need to get at that level and not at shallow level. Well, but maybe it's your stuff that there's nothing shallow if you're interested about only how to change the programs in the TV. There is nothing shallow because your focus right now on the programs, not on that stupid remote control. You're there, you're watching some interesting program, or you're looking for some interesting program, and that's your interest, not on the how the remote control works. But sometimes it could be there. But in school there is that value judgment, like, okay, the student wants just to pass that, she wants to move on, and your class is one of the hurdles on the pathway of the student.
Right.
Unfortunately. Or it could be fortunately even. It could be sometimes fortunately in a way that it could be helpful. Like again, let me give examples. Like people learn how to drive, and a car, for example, right? So people are not, most of the people not interested in how engine works, or how brakes works, or how this or that works. It's an interesting question, but a lot of people not interested. Why? Because for them, driving a car is to moving from one place to another, or even experiencing that process. There's some people like that. But it's not about necessarily interest in how things work and why inside of the car. What makes car as a car? And that's fine. There is nothing. It's nothing. It doesn't show that they show shallow learners or shallow people in general, because they have a completely different focus. And that class can be, even if it's not they forced to take your class. Even they might find importance on your class, or my class. But if they see it's very peripheral or instrumental in their lives, it's like the car. And that kind of thing. And for me, nothing wrong about that kind of attitude. They want to learn how to safely drive a car, and so on and so forth. So, and this is what kind of become interesting challenge. You have students, and I have students of different, who are have different interests, and they could be in general and specific topics. It could be within the specific. and how to deal with that.
Right.
And in natural environment, it's easy. Like, for example, in our open symposium, we can ask questions, we can discuss like whatever we want to discuss, right? We can leave at any point, and some people like might leave because of necessities. Like Christy, I know that she wrote about her laptop has limited batteries, and unfortunately she doesn't have adapter. So she's out. I don't know, Avram, why he left, but what doesn't, it's not a big deal. But in class, it is sometimes a big deal about it. And,
So I'm thinking kind of what you said about play and how play and dialogue is kind of what led you. And then I'm thinking about play as research and, whether that should be a part of this, idea of dialogue as research. How does play have a role in, or can have a role in research, or can it be the driving force in research?
Oh, I think definitely.
And then how would you represent it?
Yeah, depends of course on people and on what you're researching, but definitely I think that there are phases, at least if not some whole research, where you brainstorming about let's say you could say like, let's create as many explanations for what we see as possible, like silly ones, supernatural ones, whatever. That's kind of a play, and in this kind of a shake up, you can stir a lot of things and topics that you haven't thought before. That's the one thing. Another thing is you can try to mimic things and try to kind of replay what happened and then see it from different angles. So there is so many possibilities how play comes in question. I think it's just playfulness about research, I think, is very important because it opens up all the possibilities. It actually unfinalizes everything, I think.
Let me add to that, because I'm teaching classes on so-called methodology. I don't like that term, but nevertheless, one thing that it's very interesting how in natural sciences, specifically in physics, as far, because I used to be a physics teacher, that's why I know more. I don't know about chemistry, whether or not it's happened in chemistry, but in physics it's happened a lot in past and modern times, which is fantasy as a part of research.
Yeah.
Like, let me give example in physics, and it's a huge thing in physics, which is called imaginary experiments. And, the debates between Einstein, who was one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, and who hated quantum mechanics, and tried to undermine as much as possible, and Niels Bohr, who also father of quantum mechanics, who defended it. And their debate continue driving right now modern physics. And it's already 100 years ago. And debate was heavily based, Einstein was very good about this, imaginary experiments. And some of them absolutely crazy. What's interesting is that modern physics, experimental physics, managed to really replicate this crazy fantasy experiments. I can give you examples, absolutely crazy, and it's like also aesthetic. For me, it has aesthetic values of how people manage to replicate this research really experimentally, because of course Einstein wanted to some of his ideas to create absurd situations. He just get some implications from the quantum mechanics, and he created out of them absurd situation, and that absurdity is absurdism is part of his you can call it methodology, fantastic methodology. Like, for example, let me give one example. He found, and this is part of his genius actually, to figure out that these implications, that according to some kind of part of the quantum mechanics, there are some particles, it's only particular particles, but if it changes in one place, it simultaneously changes in another, even if the billions of the billions light years away from each other, and it's impossible. It's actually also creates a lot of problems with theory of relativity and so on and so forth. What's interesting is that the experiments was done, and it was done maybe, I don't know, relatively recently, maybe 5 years ago. And to a big surprise of Einstein, it was going to the Niels Bohr way, which is they really changed. They were not billions years away from each other, but it doesn't matter. The change one, another change, and it's measurable. And this is why we, these things is completely acceptable in exact sciences and not very much acceptable in social sciences. And in my view, we need to legitimize that. And especially in dialogic way, because by the way, they had really very passionate dialogues about that. They had conferences where they were bringing this kind of crazy cases, imaginary crazy cases, and debating them. And then they did experiments about that. And they did experiments almost like 100 years after. Because how many, it's not only because of technology change, it's ingenuity of this experimental physicists who figure out how it's possible to do it in real life. Like that.
So let me tell you some development. So in another way of doing dialogic research, I studied this meeting that was done in a democratic school in Oslo in 1967. That was the first democratic school in Oslo, and it lasted a very long time until the 2004. It doesn't matter. And I came upon a transcript of that meeting, which was held only 2 months after the school started. It was high school, and so the people who are participating there are between 15 and 17 or 18 years old. And it was a big debate. Somebody described it as fireworks in a can. It was the school almost broke up on that day or something like that. A lot of them. So there will be a new special issue in our Dialogic Pedagogy journal that's about democracy and dialogue, democratic schooling and dialogic pedagogy, that we have a lot of things done already. Maybe it will appear by January, February. So among other things, I studied that meeting and wrote about 3 articles about only that meeting. And so one article is, because I had a transcript of the meeting, I created a vignette. Of course, it was translated. So just creating a vignette about, I didn't hear the voices, I didn't see the people. It's 50 years ago and things like that. I created a story out of it using only the transcript as real voices. So it's a story. Another article is I try to follow Bakhtin's idea of person idea, so that ideas are embodied in people, and people are not, they're invested in their own ideas, are them really. So I try to analyze these ideas that were in conflict and came to a conclusion that there may be 4 discrete stances, perspectives, but I wanted to capture them not only finalized analytically, which is the 3rd article, but also as person idea. And that I wrote as 4 monologues of imaginary people based on some real, sometimes amalgam of several of them. And I took into account a lot of things that happened in the 60s. That's also, by the way, my generation. I was the same age as these people, but in a different country. But I try to use like what were the popular songs, and they're thinking about like what were their metaphors that they could be using there as they're saying that. based on songs, based on other feminism that appeared, based on the political movements in the 60s and all of that. Anyway, so the further thing that's now going away from me a little bit is that in Serbia in this fall, I'll be there. I'm traveling on September 1st and coming back to my site. But there is a festival, a drama festival that's 60 years old, the experimental theaters, and 25 years to now there is a accompanying festival about drama in education. So there's a lot of educators that participate, and for years I was part of that in some way. So a friend of mine who leads that festival, and another friend who is a professor of literature in a high school. She told her about this. So she read something and she discussed it with her high school students. And in her drama sections, they want to improvise based on this four-person ideas. They will not recreate them or play them. First, it's in English and they'll speak in Serbian, but they will, 4 of them will impersonate some kind of like inspired by these 4 ideas, their ideas, and the other part of the section, there will be other people in the class in this meeting. So there will be now and we will tape this, of course. And so it's kind of like going further. And it will not be about their ideas about what's a good school, but about their ideas what's a good school theater, because they want to create their own theater in school, not just the drama section, but the public theater that's run by students. So this is the development. So we are working on that too, in a way. So see, this is in a way, this is for me also using play, using drama, and deepening and widening the dialogue. Something that inspired some other people to do something and to continue discussions and dialogues about and maybe turning into something completely new. So this is for me exciting.
I can give you I did one research when I used fantasy as a research, part of the research. It's actually started when I was a teenager. I was interested in science fiction. And one of my favorite writers was Isaac Asimov. I'm not very original about that. But he wrote a wonderful, I don't know, it's like between long short story and a very short novel. It's called Profession, because it's about education, by the way. It's about the stories like that, very briefly, brief. And so it's in the future, and there is no education in the future. Basically, what they do, they change your brain. There is special procedure to change your brain. Like, for example, what's the difference between, like, Melissa, you can read, right? You can read and write. I can see you writing, you reading. What's the difference between person like you and person like who cannot read and write? It's some changes in the brain. So why cannot we directly change that and boom, in a minute you start reading and writing? Okay, and they're doing that in that future in 2 parts. First, they do for kind of basic, kind of elementary type of stuff like reading, writing, counting, and whatever when you're 7 years old. And then when you're teenager, when your brain become mature, they do testing of your brain and trying to figure out like what you're good at, where you like predisposition of your brain, based with the idea of the profession. For example, maybe your brain is ready for you to be a writer. Or maybe your brain to be good for to be a poet or engineer or technician or like ballet dancer and that or whatever. Yeah. So the second time when you in teenage time, they change your brain so you will become get a profession, particular profession, and that's done. Again, it's so there is 3 procedures. First, for general reading and writing and like general things when you're a little one, and during the teenage time when you like 16, I forgot exact time. I think it's written there, exact time. And after that, you become what it's called diplomized professional. And diploma means it's there is no diploma in a sense. It's a fact that your brain has been changed to now, so you can do something. So anyway, the story itself is very interesting. I'm not going to tell you what's happened but what attracted my attention to this idea, what I started sensing, this idea that we actually hate education. We want to shorten it as much as possible. Ideally, not to have boom and you're done. You, for example, Melissa, you want to like this to speak Russian. Why don't boom and you speak Russian? They change your brain. So I invented this research kind of things. I asked people in 3 different cultures, which was in United States, in Brazil, and in Russia, the question of different ages with different educational levels, something like that. Imagine that scientists invented magic learning pill. And it's very particular magic learning pill. You take it with the water, and in 5 minutes, you will be able to do or understand whatever you want to do or understand. So, for example, if you want to learn Japanese, Melissa, what I suspect you maybe want to learn, so there is a special, like, I don't know, pink pill for Japanese language, modern Japanese language. You take in 5 minutes, you speak, read, write in Japanese. By the way, you're doing non-verbal things exactly like Japanese typical Japanese person will do it. Or you want to learn how to do like calculus. Boom, there is a pill, I don't know, blue pill or whatever. You get with the water in 5 minutes. You do calculus. You know all definitions. You can operate that. You can understand everything. Can make proofs and whatever you want. So the question was, I asked people, is there something for which they will not take pill and for which they will take pill and why? And it was very interesting research. By the way, it's we had predictions and all our predictions were wrong. Like one prediction was, according to, by the way, Isaac Asimov, based on that story, very few people will not to take pill. They will take pill for everything.
Really?
Yep, that's what Isaac Asimov predicted. Our research shows that it's not true. It's university. There is 2 things what we found. There is always for things that for which people will take pill, and there is always for which people will not take pill. Also, our expectation was that we can predict for what people will take pill and for what they will not, and we couldn't. And by the way, in research, we did kind of things where we try to predict how we can predict that. We try to do double-blind kind of part of research. You see, we were using all this positivistic methodology for that. Like we did double-blind, like we gave like only description of the practices. And we asked, do you think that the person will take pill or will not? And we explained like, well, and graduate students, because of course we use graduate students, couldn't predict.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah, I replicated in one of my graduate classes this research. So unfortunately I lost the recording of that class, but I remember the most puzzling answer of one student who said that it's a deeply moral question and that she would never give the pill to any of her children or other people. And on herself, maybe she would, but she would never use it to learn social skills and never use it to learn anything else, but maybe just like a mundane, like how to drive a car or something like that.
I would say completely opposite. They will exactly use that pill for that. And by the way, there is a very also justifications can be very different and not necessarily straightforward. Again, it's published. Unfortunately, that case, what I'm not talking about, it was not part of research. It was part of the, I'm using a lot of this for teaching. This, including about this methodology.
Right. So sometimes it's a very good opening for the first class.
Like, it's not for the first class, but for this topic about issue. Right. No, it's not for the first class, but I never used it for the first class, but for the topic of this or kind of fantasy research or imagination, using imagination.
Too,
yeah. Well, it's been almost 2 hours. Another wonderful conversation with you. But I probably need to wrap up soon so I can go down and feed my parents. I just have a few like technical questions, which I can just email them to you, but well, this one is an easy answer. Eugene, when you do the opening syllabus and if a student chooses prisoner of education, all of that, how do you assign grades? Do you just tell them all you're all getting A's right up straight away? No? What do you do?
No, not at all. And actually students would not like that. That's why. So if it's prisoner of education, it's become private communication between me and the student and basically ask, what grade do you want? And whatever grade they say, and you will be surprised, they will not say, all of them will not say A. And again, I told them, do not justify, just say what grade you want, and you will get that grade. Most of them will choose A, but sometimes, remember, once you choose C+, for example, whatever, it's fair, whatever, but it is. So with the students who choose to have this non-conventional closed syllabus, which is about basically passing exam. It's like driving license. It will be defined completely by exams and tests and exams and nothing else. With the students who is open syllabus, it's up to them. Again, I'm not asking any justification. That just give me how you want it, and that will be again. And mostly A, but I would say they much more will say unconditional because they basically don't want grade. It means no grade. It's not A, actually. It's not to have any grade.
They just don't want to have a pressure of the grade.
Yeah, mostly. Yeah. Some of them wanted, and some of them, because I asked, some of them even wanted, it's very rare. They want to engage me that I need to make judgments. But I told them, I'm not easy. I'm define how I should do it. It should be like authorial, or it should be a criteria, somewhat criteria. They need to develop that. And opening syllabus, it's very important. For them, grades super important, and they don't want unconditional A or something like that. And it's not about their desire. They told me, I need to design it because this is the grades actually, it's about pushing them to study. And study what they want to study, it's true, but they want me to push the study. And grades is the only like real stimulus or motivator in this case. And they wanted exactly that. Because I was like, you can, no, they said, this is the only thing. And if you kind of destroy that, we will realize that it's fake and we will not accomplish what we want to accomplish. It's what I call out paternalism, which is bizarre term because it's contradiction in terms. Because paternalism is somebody else thinks what's good for you.
Right.
Auto means exactly you doing that, but it's requiring for yourself paternalism.
It reminds me of self-determination theory and kind of their different types of motivation. One is like that, where it's external, but it's internalized, and it's a way of motivating.
It's complexity of this. And I realized that, by the way, I recorded, just happens, all my classes recorded. And once we had absolutely marvelous dialogue with one of the students about that, and which helps me to figure out, conceptualize why is that and why I should do it. By the way, that's why I'm proponent of not self-directed education, but mostly self-education, because that's self-education, but not self-directed. It's not subject at all.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. My other two questions are like, I'm wondering for some reading recommendations and, but maybe I'll just send you by email, like reading recommendations for my class, especially, maybe a primary source with Bakhtin. I don't want to assign them a whole book, but, if you have recommendations for that. And then the other one is maybe, I was wondering if maybe you'd be willing to join my class via Zoom this quarter. So I'll send you details. Yeah.
That will be fun. Thanks a lot, Melissa, for organizing this. It's very
very nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I always do, but this is just, I learned so much from you. So thank you.
Melissa, one interesting thing just before we get, could be if you at some point would do something like you work on some particular research and there is something that you struggle with from exactly dialogic point of view, how to do something or why to do whatever. Will be fascinating to have like a practical workshop almost like about that. By the way, I'm stealing that idea from we have this ethnography forum at from University of University of Pennsylvania. And they have this wonderful format of conference when people bring interesting situation from their research. They're not presenting final research. It's not about finding. It's about exactly work in progress where people struggle with, and everybody try to like figure out what to do, give advice, or problematize, or make it deeper. I love this. I always attend sessions, and they're always dialogic, of course, because it's interesting problem at hand, and everybody gets into that, and always become interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like using case studies too in classes in education. I read a lot of like encouraging professors to use case studies.
But in this case, it's much more even because it's practical and people really help.
It's a real thing.
Very authentic.
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, and see you sometimes later. See you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.